First of all, I just want to. We're doing this. We're doing this on webinar as well today. So we've got a group of people out there, probably about the same number as in here. Thanks to Ashley and Graham and the team here wonderful team here at Hempsons who sponsor this event. Thank you, Hempsons, as always. We've got a new bit. This is what the mics are all about. This is just to make the podcast experience really good for the people not in the room, so they can hear you as well as hear us really, really well. Welcome to everybody on podcast as well. Great to see you all here, and let us know how this experience feels for you. Very quickly, those that don't know me, my name's Dearden-Phillips. I'm the founder and kind of convener of Social Club, the chair, whatever you want to call it. We're just approaching our we're about to enter our 5th year of Social Club, which is unbelievable. This is probably our 50th event or something like that, and they just keep getting better, which is really good, because many of you are bringing fantastic ideas about who to bring to the club. I'm getting calls every week saying, you know, have you seen this person? Have you seen that person? And this club started to fuel its own energy, which is fantastic. So thank you to you all for your inspiration and ideas. Always, it's brilliant. So, what's today all about? Well, I'm not going to say too much because I don't want to steal any of Dan's thunder. But when I talk to you in your businesses, and Mark as well, we often come across the fact that you're in difficult and complicated negotiations, and not always getting the right end of that either. Often feeling like you're struggling in those situations. And there's a few reasons for that. I think partly because a lot of you haven't had much sort of training in that area, but also a lot of you as people are quite agreeable, and you don't want to get in the way of relationships, and therefore sometimes suffer in complex negotiations. So I think for that reason, when I met Dan basically. You may have seen him on the telly. You may have seen him in the media. He's one of the world's, certainly one of Britain's foremost negotiation experts. And I happen to know somebody who knew Dan, and that got me to his door. And I said, look, you know, this is our group. This is their need. And he said, well, yeah, perhaps I could come along. And I said, that'd be wonderful. And he runs a business called Bridgeability, which kind of helps people learn to be negotiators. He works with people like the FA, Tesco, Deutsche Bank. The British government, you know, trains their negotiators. So he's the man as far as this stuff's concerned. So I'm delighted that he's with us. He's going to do a really fun interactive session on how to do this stuff. And then we'll have a bit of time at the end, I hope, for questions, conversations, and so on. So I'm going to leave you in his hands, really. I might get involved a bit, but I'm hoping just to sit back and enjoy the ride. For the podcast people, let us know how it's all feeling. Graham's here and Ashley on the terminal. If there's anything not quite working, just let us know, and we'll sort it. But so I hope you all enjoy this as well. It's been designed with you in mind as well. Right, that's enough from me. Would it help, Dan, if everyone just went around this room and introduced themselves, or not? Would that be a good thing? Would it give you a bit of okay, just your name, your organisation, and that'll do, because otherwise it'll take too long. So I'm going to go clockwise. I'm going to start here with Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Barrett. I'm from Social Minds.
I'm Chris Monday from Crossways Community.
Jude Williams from Literacy and Pirates. Julia Meek from ACT Group.
Jim Lenwell from Bikeworks.
Ralph Burnell, Bromley Healthcare.
Brenton O'Keefe, Epic CIC.
Mervyn Kelly first.
Maria Mills, Active Prospects. Andrew Biggs, Balance.
Ben Rick from Social and Sustainable Capital.
Bill Woodbridge from Folk Lifestyle Solutions, CIC.
Ben Spinks, School Improvement Partnership.
Judith Brady, Leadership for Social Change, which is my own business. I do interim work.
Mark Malay, More Kingston's now.
Graham Trick, Hempsons.
Ashley from Hempsons.
Susanna Holder, Professional Tutoring.
Christina O'Connor, Accelerate.
Alan Punjab, Forest Church Council.
Ian Hempseed from Hempsons.
Lisa Lemon-Mormon from Hertfordshire Music Service.
Margaret Sharp from Social.
So just a flavour for you there, Dan, of who we've got in the room. Couldn't do much more, but that's it.
Brilliant.
We're over to you.
Thank you very much, Craig. Where possible, I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and adopt the traditional arm wrestling stance. I don't know if we have an even number or not, and if we haven't, then Craig is getting involved. Now, Your task, your objective is, I'm about to give you 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, your objective is, it's an arm wrestle, but ongoing, is to get the back of the other person's hand down on the table as many times as you can. It's as simple as that. You've got to get their hand down as many times as you can in 30 seconds, starting now.
I don't think it's going to do it any difference.
Halfway through. Five seconds left. Okay, time's up. Now, you weren't expecting an arm wrestle before breakfast today, were you? So, what all I need you to do now, either mentally or if it's a really big number, you might need to write it down. Just keep a note of what you achieved. Don't forget it was how many times you got their hand down. So just keep a note of that, and we'll return to that very shortly. But well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the very glowing introduction from Craig there. My name's Dan Hughes from Bridgeability, and this is what I do. I spend my time exclusively immersed in the world of negotiation. It might mean training people. It might mean getting involved in helping our clients with their strategies. And we work with clients and businesses from all sectors, some third sector, some public sector, but mainly private sector. The clicker doesn't seem to be working, just by the way. It was before. Can I press a button instead?
Yeah.
That's not working either. I'll leave it with you. I'll carry on talking. So we work with all sorts of people. Really broadly speaking, is buyers and sellers, but not exclusively. It's often business owners, who I'm going to say predominantly are sellers in that case. It might be lawyers, but big retailers and their big banks of buyers that they have, whether it be direct, indirect procurement, account managers, it really doesn't matter. But what we usually find is that people spend more time negotiating than they might first recognize. Now, we've only got an hour or so today, this morning, to think and talk about negotiation. Thank you. And I don't know when the last time that you did that was. Even just having an hour might be a bit of a luxury. You probably don't, I would imagine, on a day-to-day basis, take an hour out to think about, well, how do you negotiate? How do you come across in your negotiations? What's your approach? What's your style? Do you have a style? Well, you do, but do you know what that style is? And if you do you only have one style? What about the other party? How do you read them? How do you understand what's important to them in the negotiation? What about your strategy, your tactics that you're going to use when negotiating? And I'm even prepared to bet that given the audience that I've got today, you might even consider that negotiation is a bit of a dirty word. I bet there's one or two in the room that may think that. Craig has already alluded to something really interesting. If you negotiate, well, I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but is that going to get in the way of the relationship? Is that what negotiation does? Should we avoid a negotiation because we don't want to damage anything in the long term? And people often subconsciously, sometimes very consciously, will decide that. What if the people that you're negotiating with are also the people that, that feed you? You know, the owners, the funders of your organisations. That makes the relationship quite difficult, quite tricky. So we'll talk about all of these things. We'll talk about a whole load of other areas when it comes to negotiation. We can put it into three very broad areas. It's working. People often ask me, is negotiation an art or a science? And the answer is that it's both. You need to have a plan, and that's where the science really comes in. That's the numbers, that's your strategy, your tactics. How are you going to get to where you need to get to? Do you even know where you need to get to, first of all, and then how are you going to get there? So it's about having a strategy, a plan, thinking through, if you give in one area, can you take something in another? So the science is the bit that you do perhaps in the cold light of day before you get there. But as well, many people have said in different ways, the Chinese military strategist who said that the best strategy doesn't survive first contact with the enemy. Well, Mike Tyson, I think, put it a little bit better. He said you can have the best plan in the world, but when you get punched in the face by the other bloke, it gets a bit harder. Something like that anyway. And it's true in negotiation as well. You can have the best science, the best plan, the best strategy, and then what happens? You sit down with another person and they make a threat or point out negative consequence, or they start employing their own tactics and approach. And this is what we see all the time. The best plan in the world all of a sudden just flies out of the window. So the art of negotiation, this is the behavioral piece. This is the bit between the two humans that are conducting the negotiation, and it's way more influential than the science. Now, you need to have a plan. If you want to stick to a plan, you kind of need to have one in the first place. The science is important, but the behavioral piece, the art of negotiation, understanding human behavior, why do people behave in the way they do? Why do you behave in the way that you do? If you avoid negotiation, why is that? If you enjoy negotiation and thrive on it and look forward to it, why is that? So there are so many things that we need to understand, and in only an hour we don't have time to go into things in a huge amount of detail, so we'll touch on lots of things, and because it's only an hour, you may want more. I'm kind of hoping at the end of it, and we can talk about that if any of you want to come on. And we run open programs very regularly, advanced ones, 2.5 day long ones, and we've put a promotion together in conjunction with the social clubs, so we can talk through that and send you details of that after as well. For any of you who do want more, then let us know and we can work something out. Now, the first thing here, here's the other dirty word, isn't it? Selling. Nobody gets involved in sales, except everyone does, because without sales, it's very hard to have any kind of business really. Without, whether you call them customers or not, without users of your business or organisation, it's probably not going to carry on for very long. But one of the first mistakes that we see people making is not differentiating between these two disciplines. But now, when I talk about selling, I'm not necessarily talking about what a salesperson or an account manager would do. That's not necessarily the point here. They are a good example of somebody who would get involved in selling, but we all get involved in selling all of the time, because it's these sorts of behaviours that I'm talking about when we refer to selling. So it could be just that you're selling a vision. It might be that you're talking to your funders or your bosses or your teams of people that work for you about where are we going this year or next year? What's the vision of the organization? That might need a bit of selling. If you want somebody to behave in a different way, you probably need to sell to them exactly what it is that you want them to do. So that's really what we mean by selling. And we all sell all the time. And these are the types of behaviors that we can get involved in when we sell, in what we mean by selling. And that is, first of all, we better explain to them exactly what it is that we want them to do. If we want them to do something differently, we need to explain it, maybe in some detail. We might need to back it up. We need to make some claims as to why what we're suggesting or saying is right or better. So that needs some qualifying, probably some justifying data to back it up. And often when we get involved in this process of trying to convince people that our way is better or cheaper or more efficient or effective or right or whatever, well, as we convince them, we've got to think, what are we convincing them of? If we're convincing them that what we're suggesting is better, well, better than what? And this is often the approach that other people will come from, better than the way they currently do it. And often that's where you'll find defensive positions from the other party. And selling, justifying from one party will often lead to arguing. People will get defensive in their position and they'll point out why in fact they're right and you're wrong. And it may not be what people would traditionally recognise as an argument, but nevertheless that's what it is. And once we get involved in arguing, that's something else altogether. Now, if we are selling something, if we want someone to get on board with us, we'd better do that with enthusiasm. That would be appropriate to do so. And ultimately, when we sell, we're asking the other party, we're asking them if they're on board. Are they with us? A salesperson is actually going to ask for the order, ask for the contract. You may be involved in doing that. But no matter who you're selling to, we're checking with them that they're with us. But when we negotiate, it's a different set of behaviours which become appropriate. And just by the way, well, we've got questioning at the top there. So by the way, that's absolutely fine for you to do today as well. So please feel free. You know, any questions? We will have a question time at the end, but you don't have to stand on ceremony. As far as I'm concerned, fire any questions at me that you like as we're going along. And often a question I get right now is that you've got asking on one side and questioning on the other. And what's the difference? And there's a fundamental difference between the two, because asking has this permissive aspect to it. You're asking for their go-ahead. You're checking that they're with you. So it has this permissive, maybe even submissive, if you want to exaggerate it a little bit, aspect to it. But questioning is different. Questioning is to understand their priority, to understand their world, understand what's important to them in this particular interaction. And then most of the things on the right-hand side of the screen here might appear quite passive. Because what we're advocating here is a lot of listening, thinking, considering, weighing things up. And if it does appear quite passive, well, that would be great, because it may well appear quite passive. You'll achieve more in a negotiation through silence and listening than you will through justifying and arguing. That'll guarantee it every single time. But of course certain things need to be said, and they need to be stated in a certain fashion, perhaps positioned in advance. But then once we're started, you want the other party talking more than you do once the negotiation has started. Really important point. And ultimately, when we negotiate, we don't ask, we tell. We tell the other party not just what's going to happen, but how it's going to happen as well. I'm not talking about style yet. There are ways in which you can tell. It doesn't have to be imposing or aggressive, but nevertheless, it should be assertive. And we advocate an assertive style of negotiation. Assertive isn't aggressive. Firm isn't rude. But where's the line along there? Well, only you can define that. And this is a fundamental mistake that we see people making all of the time, is just not recognizing the difference between that. You hear these things all the time. You hear people saying, oh, you'd be a great negotiator, you've got the gift of the gab, or you'd be a great negotiator because you win every argument. And probably nothing could be further from the truth. Let me just illustrate it. Can I borrow your pen just for a moment? Thank you very much. And I've already, Lisa, I was going to pretend I remembered it. I just saw it on your badge there. Now, let's imagine for one moment that I want to sell, assuming I hadn't already given it to Lisa, if I wanted to sell this pen to Lisa, I might say, Lisa, I've got a bridgeability pen here for you, and it's yours for only £10. Now, Lisa, as an experienced negotiator may reply that £10, that's ridiculous, she might say, and I'm not prepared to pay any more than £1 for a pen like that. As she just dismisses the proposal for the pen just out of hand like that. And if I've just had it dismissed in such a way, if this is what I do, perhaps, I might even take that a little bit personally. I might feel that I need to strengthen my position here. I've got to do something to strengthen my position, I may conclude, and I may decide that the best way to do that is to say something like, but Lisa, you don't understand, it's a bridgeability pen. That is just a brand association, well, it makes it way more than £10, but anyway, it's got a web address, our strap line, this is a great pen. Aside from all that, just technically, this is a good pen because, like most pens of this class, it's got a retractable nib. But most pens of this class, when you click them, typically you get about 1,000 clicks. That's before the mechanism starts to go wrong. That would be normal. This pen will click, guaranteed, a minimum of 2,000 times. And that's because of the ink delivery system in here. Most pens, normally, you will draw a straight line with a pen, you get about 1 kilometre, give or take, worth of ink. This one, you get at least 2 kilometres worth of ink. So you're going to use it for longer. It needs to click more. And that's despite the size. It's a brilliant pen. Now, rather than jumping in and arguing with what I'm saying, the first thing that Lisa, when she listens to what I'm saying, she's going to start, well, first of all, what am I doing? And I'm clearly selling. I'm selling the features, benefits, whatever of the pen. I'm trying to convince her of how good the pen is. What I'm going to suggest she will then do is wonder why. And she will probably conclude that I would only feel the need to do such a thing, to get involved in such a behaviour, if I was trying to strengthen or bolster my position. And I would only need to do that if I'm feeling weak in my position in the first place. And this is the first thing that inappropriate selling or justifying does in a negotiation, is that it demonstrates a position of weakness. Now, I know this is counterintuitive, And people will think, of course I need to justify my position in a negotiation. But if you do justify your position in a negotiation, the first thing it will do is look weak. The other thing that it will do is give lots of information that could be used against you. And I'd like to present you a cynical view, and that is that they will only listen to you in a negotiation to see how they can use it against you.
Dan, a little challenge, if I may.
I said you could ask questions, but not challenge.
And it's coming as a question. Shouldn't the question be, Lisa, do you need a pen?
Well, questioning at the start of the negotiation would be highly appropriate. Exactly right. So I'm not suggesting what I was doing was appropriate. In fact, what I'm doing is entirely inappropriate by reverting to selling and justifying. Now, because it's a good point and it's a good challenge. And in fact, in answer to it, the other thing, as soon as Lisa said that she was prepared, what was it, £1 she's prepared to pay for the pen, what that really means is that she's prepared to pay at least £1, probably. So what effectively she's doing there is saying she's prepared to buy my pen. So now it's the basis of the business which needs to be agreed. So in answer to your point, the negotiation starts once the need has been established. So once we know whether or not, if Lisa is not in the market for a pen and just doesn't want a pen, then it's a selling exercise. I might then need to sell the concept of Lisa buying a pen from me. That's a different set of behaviours then. But once the need's been established, once we're negotiating, if you continue with selling behaviours at that point, then they become entirely inappropriate. And any information you may give could be used against you in certain types of negotiation. I'll give a really quick example of this. There was a moment, it was 3 or 4 probably years ago now. In fact, it was just, it was in the autumn after the Brexit vote. So we're back to, we're going to talk about Brexit today, by the way. We cannot talk about negotiation for an hour without at least referring to it. It's manna from heaven for me, by the way. So this is not a Brexit-free zone. And when the vote happened in June 2016, wasn't it? In that autumn, there was one day in I think it was the September, when the top 3 items on the 10 o'clock news were all directly related to negotiation. It's one of those days that I've just been waiting for about 15 years. My heart was a warm glow that evening. Headline, of course, was Brexit. Number 2 was some trade union negotiation that was going on. And item number 3, you might remember it, but you're probably not as nerdy about negotiation as I am. Don't you remember Marmite Gate that took place 3 or 4 years ago? And it was when Unilever, in the news today, aren't they, because they're stopping advertising ice cream to children. They're a cross-category supplier. So it's soap and ice cream and Marmite, amongst many, many other products that they have. And they were putting through a price increase, and it was a 10% price increase, and they took it to their market to achieve this price increase. Their decision was to go to Tesco first. If they could get them over the line, being 30-odd% of the UK grocery trade, then that would, and then nothing wrong with that. That was a good decision. And what they did was they went in 10%, very round number, by the way. I advocate that you unround your numbers a bit. They just sound a little bit more credible than a round million or 100,000 or 10% or whatever. Unround it a bit, it sounds more credible. It was the same across all products, and there was lots of price increases going on at this point because, well, people were putting it down to Brexit. You'll have your own view on that, but the pound unquestionably took a tank that summer, and the cost of importing goods went up, and a lot of these suppliers were approaching the retailers and other areas with price increases. And what Tesco need to do is understand which ones are real and which ones are just jumping on the bandwagon, delivering a bit more shareholder value. And I happen to know what Tesco's strategy for receiving price increases is, because I helped them to devise it. And the first thing that they do is they ignore it, because sometimes it goes away. You might want to think about your negotiations in terms, there are 2 types of negotiation, broadly speaking. There's one where you want to initiate the change, like Unilever in this instance, and there's one where you might be quite happy with the status quo. So maybe that your funding's going down, for example, or maybe that you want more money from someone. One you want to happen, the other one you don't want to happen. If you want it to happen, you're the one who's going to have to be proactive initiate things and make the change. If you're not, then you're the one who might want to just kick things into the long grass, as they say, and procrastinate and postpone and all the rest of it. So that's the first thing that Tesco did. Ignore it. Sometimes goes away. Not always, but sometimes does. If they persevere with it, the next thing they do is reject it and say, not in the current climate, or however they choose to reject it, sometimes much more firmly than that. If they persevere with it, the next thing they do is they get them to justify it. And they say, use that language. How can you justify this in the current climate? And the Unilever account manager team were delighted with this because they'd been given a deck of slides by marketing as to exactly how to answer that question. And it was unarguable. It was brilliant. It was the pound. It was probably Brexit, which led to a decrease in the pound, which led to an increase in import costs. And we've held on to these cost increases for as long as we can. Now we're in a position, blah, blah, blah. Great. I mean, who could possibly take issue with that? Well, Tesco could, because they took it away. They didn't argue with it, not at that point. They thanked them very much, took it away, did a bit of research and came back and they said, okay, let's start with Marmite. As you probably know, it's a byproduct of the brewing trade. Every single ingredient in Marmite, there aren't many of them, every single one is produced in the UK. So no price increase on Marmite, and that's why it became known as Marmite Gate. And once they established that they were making it up, they rejected it on everything else as well. It became very contentious, and it was a complete failure on the part of Unilever. And the main reason it was a failure is because they decided to justify their position, which was only ever going to get used against them. Justifying doesn't work in negotiation. And I know that some of you are sitting there thinking, yeah, he's saying that, but of course it does. Of course I need to justify my position sometimes. If you do, it will look weak, and they may well use it against you. If you get into an argument then, we're then in really dangerous territory. I've already had a question before we start about negotiating with kids. Susanne, is that Susanne? Yeah. You're probably not the only one thinking that as well. Because here's one. Let's broaden it, not just with kids, but at home generally. Because I'm going to say you'll never win an argument in a negotiation because it's not in the other party's interest to agree with you very often. And trying to win an argument means that you're trying to what? Score points. Because what does winning an argument mean? Does it mean getting them at the end of it to say, do you know what? You're right and I'm wrong. That's what actually winning an argument means. Most of the time we argue we know we're not going to reach that outcome most of the time when we argue. It's more about scoring points along the way, isn't it? If you ever get involved in arguments with your kids or maybe your other half at home, and if you don't, I don't believe you, by the way, you're not trying to change their mind. You've saved a few things up for a few weeks or months, and it all oh yeah, and by the way, that's what happens, isn't it? When was the last time any of you beat your other half in an argument? I can answer that for you, by the way. It doesn't happen, does it? Because we don't win. Arguments actually aren't there to be won and lost. Arguments serve another purpose. And so when it comes to a negotiation, don't get involved. It's a fruitless exercise getting involved in a negotiation. You're getting them used to saying no to you. You're getting them comfortable with disagreeing with you. You're setting up an adversarial position, which is all entirely inappropriate. They may well not agree with you in some of the substance. It doesn't matter. They're not going to agree with you on certain things. You're not going to get them to change their mind on all of these things. It's just not going to happen, and more to the point, it doesn't need to happen. So when you're negotiating, therefore, you need to avoid all of these things on the left-hand side of the screen. These are inappropriate behaviours when it comes to negotiation, and these are the appropriate behaviours when it comes to negotiation. I'll just say it again, you'll achieve more through silence and listening than you will through justifying an argument. Now, a question for you. You get to the end of a negotiation with them, and this is whoever they are, by the way. This could be a work-based or otherwise negotiation. But it's a negotiation, and it's successful. So you have to handshake, the signature or whatever. Someone has said yes to the other party. From that moment onwards, how do you want them to feel?
Oh, they got a good deal.
Do they got a good deal? Okay, anyone else?
Positive. They want to work with you.
They want to work with you, positive. Okay, all similar lines, these old positive things. Everyone agree with that? Okay, well, I ask this question on pretty much no matter what the length of the session, I ask this question, and here are some of the answers that I've had. I update this slide every once in a while. Some of the things that we get. Beaten, somebody said, I want them to feel beaten. That one. Like they've won. Shafted is one of my favourites. I want them to feel shafted at the end of the. You might even be able to guess who the organisation was by that. Done over, rich, all sorts of things. But here's the word that we use. We want the other party to feel satisfied at the end of a negotiation. And I think the things that you were saying were absolutely along these lines, those few answers that we had. You want them to feel satisfied with the outcome, but crucially, this is irrespective of what the outcome is. I'll give you just a really quick anecdote of this. Let's say that you're going to buy something this weekend. It might be a car or let's go big, a house. You've been in the market for a while, and I take everyone in the room here, at least, I'm assuming is southeast based, so in the leafy suburbs where you live, you and your other half, you've set your budget for this house purchase. It's £1 million. That's what you can go to. That's the top of the budget. If you scrape everything together, you've got £1 million for this house purchase. You get on Rightmove. And because you've been looking, the houses go quick. We're in the southeast. The streets are paved with gold here, I believe, aren't they? And houses go quickly. The market is still crazy. And this house comes up on Saturday morning. It's brand new on the market that day. You put in your search criteria. I don't know what you put, 800,000 to 1.3 or something. I don't know. You can normally get them down a bit. This house pops up and it's on for £1 million, maybe £5 under, but it's on for £1 million. So it's right at the top of your budget, but just in budget. So you know that if it comes to it, even if there's no negotiation, you can afford this house if it comes to it, unless there's a bidding war. You make the call, you go and see it. It's unaccompanied because life is so good down here for the estate agents. They don't even know you to accompany visits. They just let you go and see the vendor directly. So that's what you do. You pull up, you get the tube, you pull up whatever at this house, you get out of the car, you look at the house, you fall in love with it. It's now become an emotional purchase. As you're walking up the drive, your other half, because of what you do and the organisations that you run and what you do on a day-to-day basis, your other half says to you, it's over to you. And I like the look of this one. Don't blow it. The pressure's now on. So up we go. We knock on the door. The door is open. Mr. Jones answers the door. In you go. And he shows you around. And this house is great. It's even better in the flesh, so to speak, than it was online. It's perfect. So much so that every time another door is opened, your other half gives a little yelp of excitement to the point where you've got to take them to one side. It's that enthusiasm, isn't it? And you say, let's just curb it. You're not doing me any favours here if you give a little jig every time you see the new nursery. So just calm it down a little bit. House is great. You have a look on your own as well without him, and all great. And you decide this is it. You have a little chat. We're going to go for this one. This is the one. So as you're about to leave, you do this as coolly as you can possibly muster. Your hand is on the door handle. You're about to leave, and you turn back and you say, "Do you know what, Mr. Jones? We like this house, and I'm even prepared to make you an offer for the house right now. It's on for £1 million. You've got £1 million." And you say, "I'll make you an offer, and I'm prepared to offer you 900,000 for the house right now." And Mr. Jones stops for all of a couple of seconds as he considers this, and he says, 900,000? Yeah, you got a deal. Done. So you shake on it, you get back in the car, you drive back to the old place, and you're sitting there. It's happy days. You got a deal for the house. It's 100,000 under asking price, 100,000 under budget. Brilliant. But on reflection, what are you thinking? Could have gone lower. Yeah. Why? It's too easy. Could have gone lower. What else might you be thinking about the place? What's wrong with it? That's, I think, what you'd be thinking. What's wrong with it? Either the house or their situation. Is it a distress sale, or is the roof about to fall in? It was too easy, and therefore, if you're thinking those things, you're thinking, we've paid too much. We should have gone lower. And if that's what you're thinking, which I agree, I think that is what you'd be thinking, if you were to describe your satisfaction, there's three answers to this: high, medium, or low. How would you describe your satisfaction? Probably
high.
High. There's always a controversial person in the room. Yeah.
I got the house without too
You
many
got
hassle.
you got the house without any hassle.
I paid less than I was anticipating.
You paid less than you were anticipating, and you got the house.
Yeah.
That I don't disagree with any of it.
I never have to think about the problem again.
Okay, all right. I'm going to come back to this school of thought. Hold that thought. I'm going to go back to it shortly. Some people are saying low. I would agree. I would be feeling my satisfaction would be low, and I'll talk why. Well, let's imagine what could have happened, actually. This might help with this. Let's imagine that you go, the same situation, same deal. You have a look at the house, all good. You're about to leave. You turn to Mr. Jones and you say, like the house, prepared to offer you 900,000. And this time, when he stops for a couple of seconds and says 900,000, he says, you're not from around here, are you? This is Surrey. Now, I suggest that you and your other half go off and have a strong coffee or something, and when you're prepared to be serious, I will talk to you, but not before then. But of course you don't leave. What you do is you stand metaphorically or maybe literally toe to toe with Mr. Jones, and you go through a process of haggling over the price of this house for a full 25 minutes, which, if any of you have done that, because most people haven't, by the way, but if you have, then you'll know why most people haven't. You'll know why most people avoid it. Most people avoid it because it's tough, it's firm, the behaviours are dismissive. This is all about price and probably personal money and very little else. It's not about long term, it's not about a relationship. And people recognise that, and the behaviours you'll see will reflect that very often. The behaviours can be unpleasant. You've all been through house purchases, probably, where the other parties engage in some unpleasant behaviour. Lots of people have been involved in that. You might experience dishonesty from the other party, and that's why a lot of people will avoid it. And maybe it's because, you know, I can afford it. I don't need to go through it. I want this house. People justify it in all sorts of ways. But so a lot of people, we call it buying back their own comfort. People will pay more just to avoid the discomfort of going through what can be a very uncomfortable situation. But not you, and not Mr. Jones. You recognise this is where good deals come from. And you know that there's a school of thought which says that it's not possible to reach the optimum outcome in your favour without at least a threat of deadlock. A deadlock is actively threatened in this negotiation. It looks like we're not going to reach a deal. Moves are made and dismissed. You move from your 900, he moves down from his million, but we're still a long way apart. After 23 minutes, you say, okay, I'll tell you what we'll do. Include the carpets, curtains, you've probably already said that, but take the board down today, take it off Rightmove, off the market this morning. I will increase the offer for a final time to 935,000. And Mr. Jones says, okay, if it's completed in a month, money in my account, within 4 weeks, you got a deal. I can work with that. And you shake on it. And you go home. And you're sitting there that evening, reflecting on this deal. How would you describe your level of satisfaction this time? Higher? Probably would be higher. And yet you've paid more. Between the two imaginary situations, of course. And what this means is that levels of satisfaction aren't pinned to the outcome. Levels of satisfaction are pinned to how you get there. You said it in the first example, it was too easy. Well, here's the thing, people don't value things which are easy to achieve. People value things which are hard to obtain. It's true for everything. It's true for the gold pens and watches and diamonds and stuff that we've got in the room here. Because gold and diamonds, it's the law of scarcity that you all know about. There's not enough of it to go around. It's hard to get hold of. When Apple launch a new iPhone or Nintendo a new game or whatever, people queue around the block, because I know it's illegal to restrict supply, but isn't it funny how they're very bad at forecasting, and people pay over the odds, don't they? And it's because of the law of not enough to go around, value goes up. So we know it's true for products and services, it's obvious. But it's also true for agreements themselves. In other words, if you or anyone, if you have to invest time, energy, emotion in reaching an agreement, you're less likely to either walk away from it or try and renegotiate it. If an agreement was easy to reach, it's easy to break. And if you make it easy for them, there's a good chance they'll come back for more, because their satisfaction isn't high enough. And I'll just say again, it's not pinned to the actual outcome, it's pinned to how you get there. So therefore, what that means is you've got to make it hard for them. Make them work for it. It's not about being difficult or obstinate or awkward. That's not what I mean by this. Just make them work for it. Kids, make them work for it. Don't give it away. Whatever it is, watching telly, anything. Ice cream, the thing of the day. Make them work for it. They'll value it more. And the same with the people that you negotiate with. And if they value it more, then you've got more chance of getting something in return for it. which is really what you want to get to. It's not about how much it costs you to give it, whatever it may be. It's about what it's worth to them, and what it's worth to them is about how you trade it. It's about how you make it a difficult thing to obtain. And I know what some of you are thinking. I'll just preempt the question that I'm about to get. Yes, but Dan, in our world, in this sector, here's Craig's point from earlier on, it's all about relationship. It's about long term. It's not about the money. It's about other stuff. And what we therefore have to do is invest a bit now and soften them up and show them how cooperative and easy to work with we are, because it's so competitive. We're after funding, so's a million other people after funding from them. And then if we do that, it'll set the right tone, and we'll get it back from them further down the line. And wouldn't that be great? But it doesn't work like that. You go soft on them now, they're going to go even harder on you further down the line. Because in the same way that you've got them ranked, who are the difficult ones, who are the easy ones, and who do you go to first? The easy ones. They've got you pegged somewhere as well on that list. Only you can answer. Maybe you can't even answer, I don't know where you might be. So you set the tone as to how you are to do business with. It's not about difficult, it's not about that, it's about making them work for it. Really important. So there's a definition of negotiation which we like to use, and it's an informal one, but it's negotiation is the art of letting them have your way. It kind of encapsulates this to some degree at least. Okay, now we've still got a lot to get through. I'm talking too much. Despite saying you shouldn't talk too much, I'm in danger of doing it myself here. Now, the thermometer. This is our means of categorizing different circumstances, different types of negotiation. Cold, cool and warm are the three areas. You may not be able to read all the words. Cold negotiations, this is bidding and haggling. Cool negotiations, dealing and hard bargaining. Warm negotiations, relationship building, problem solving. Win-win, this great phrase that people use all the time when it comes to negotiation. Everything's got to be win-win, some people say. How do you assess whereabouts on the thermometer your upcoming negotiation is? Well, by looking at these factors. These are the factors which influence temperature, or therefore position on the thermometer. Now, as we run through these, if you were to answer these points in the following way, so if it's a money-focused negotiation and nothing else, it's just about money. If it's a very commoditized thing, if there's no need for trust, and this is exciting, isn't it? Is it going to have built further by the time I get to that point there? If it's not complex, if there is only one issue here, and it's price, well, it's not complex. There's an imbalance of power, heavy reliance, that's what that says here, heavy reliance from one party on the other. If I click it, it might take us to the next slide, I don't know. There's no opportunity for creativity, or of a commoditized product. You can't get creative here. If you answer all of those in that way, then you are very firmly at the bottom end of the thermometer. That is the very essence of a cold negotiation. But rather than doing it that way, let's imagine, let's go with the stereotype here. Some of you will have been in this situation. You're in North Africa, Middle East, these sorts of places. You're on holiday in Dubai or Marrakesh or somewhere. You go into the souk, the bazaar, to buy I don't know what you buy, a handbag, or maybe let's go with a rug. I don't know if you'd buy a rug. You're not going to fit it in your suitcase, are you? Let's go with a handbag. And so in you go. We've all been in these situations, and if you haven't, you know exactly what these places are like, because they are like you'd imagine them to be. You know what? You could probably even smell it if you think about it now. You're there. You're in the souk in Marrakesh. You can smell it. It smells of leather and spice and a bit of sweat. These are busy, enterprising places. You go in there to buy your handbag. And as you go in, there's a stall over on the other side selling handbags. Over you go. It's normally a bloke in this situation. He's talking to someone else. That's good. You can have a little look around uninterrupted. And I was kind of hoping while I'm chatting away, that it might keep building. It's not. Okay. So there's no price on anything while you're looking around. That's good. It means you can actually assess things without being influenced by the price tag. And so you have a look. I don't know how you assess a handbag. It looks, it smells like leather. I know. You find the one you want. Over he comes, and here it starts. We're not necessarily going to thank you very much. Talk about price straight away. He doesn't want to get to price yet. He wants to know a bit about you first of all. He's going to ask you some questions. The point we had earlier. And his first question is, where are you from? And you say, Essex. Where? And he says, where's it? He says, where's Essex? Near London. And you say near London. And what's just happened to the price? And then he says, who's this for? And you say, it's for my elderly granny or my wife, or my whatever, and she's always wanted one of these straight from Morocco as the price goes up a little bit more. Because he does it very nicely. He does it in the spirit of relationship, but there isn't one. There doesn't need to be one. There's no trust required. You're never going to see him again. He's going to get cash, you're going to get the handbag. There is no risk in this negotiation. When are you going home? Well, I meant to come earlier in the week, but actually we're flying home this afternoon, so can we get on with it, please? As now you're under a time pressure, which you've just shared with him. All this information is only going to work against you in this kind of negotiation. Both parties are going to measure their success or failure by the price that's paid and nothing else. And that's a cold negotiation. That's in your private life. It happens in work all of the time. It's the most common area of negotiation, I'm afraid. You get tenders. You get competitive situations where you're up for funding against other people. It's just as simple as that. And they may even play it that way. A lot of negotiations, more than people like to recognize, take place here, low end of the thermometer negotiations. Then you have cool negotiations, where it's not just price, it's other things. It may be contract length. It may be you buy a new car from a car dealer in your private life. It's still about the price. That's still the headline in that sort of negotiation, but it's also about the extras. When you're going to receive delivery, they're interested in how you're going to fund it. Is it cash, or are you leasing it? If so, is it through them, etc. But still, the bragging rights in the pub that night, I got 8% discount. It's not I got a brolly. You know, that's a bit of a weak one at the end of it. Oh, and I got a brolly as well. You know they've got a crap deal if they're bragging about the brolly. It's the percentage discount. That's the meat of it, isn't it? And a lot of negotiations take place here at work as well, because it's about length of contract or other things, whatever those things may be. But if the price or the money is still the headline, you'll never get higher than cool. Top end of the thermometer, warm negotiations, is where it's not about money anymore. It might still be in there, but it's no longer the defining factor. It's now about risk reduction. It's about less tangible variables. So exclusivity, risk, these kinds of things, contract, payment terms, you know, whatever. All sorts of things that may come into your negotiations. Harder to define. And so these are competitive negotiations. These are creative negotiations, because you've got other variables which you can play against each other. These are collaborative negotiations at the top end here, because you're working with the other party. And if you're getting involved in collaborative negotiation, then you need high levels of trust. And if you need trust, you need openness. So what I'm advocating is not being too open down here and telling him it's for your other half and she's elderly and whatever else and you're flying home this afternoon. Be more closed with info. Up here, if you're not open with info, you're not going to build a trust which is required to get involved in truly collaborative negotiations. So you may have noticed I'm using language like appropriate this morning. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. There is no right or wrong when it comes to this, because what could be very right up there could be very wrong down there. It's a bit like the Norwegians. I think it's the Norwegians. They have a phrase saying there's no such thing as bad weather, it's just inappropriate clothing. And it's exactly the same for negotiation. There's no bad circumstance. It's just the circumstance. And you adapt your approach the same way you put a coat on this morning because the forecast is it's going to rain. If you get wet today when it rains later on, you've got no excuse, because we can all tell on our phones what the weather's going to be like. In the same way, you can't complain coming out of a negotiation thinking they just did me on the funding or on the whatever, because you can identify in advance what it is. You probably know what they're like. People have reputations. You may have dealt with them before. So you can adapt your approach accordingly and proactively, and this is what the thermometer is all about. Now, that strange thing I did with you first thing this morning, I sometimes forget to come back to this, by the way, and I leave and people say, what was that all about, that arm wrestle? So I'm glad to say I remembered today. Did anybody achieve 0 in the arm wrestle? We did 1 or 2 who achieved 0, or in fact 0, or should we say 5 or less? In fact, anybody achieved 5 or less? If you achieved 5 or less, this is how many times you got their hand down, including 0. Then I'm going to say you were operating here. This is competitive. In other words, if you went in there trying to beat them, then you may have gotten down once, maybe a couple of times if you were strong, if you had the balance of power. If you achieve somewhere between 5 and 20, does anybody fall into that category? Oh, we've got 1. Now, we know what's happened here. Either Mark's really strong, and we've got no others, by the way, that did that. Well, some would get quite a few of this sometimes. To get that product, you need to get a bit creative. Because all I said was, it's how many times you get their hand down. In other words, you weren't being penalised for how many times they got your hand down. So if you were to do it again, what I suggest you might do is that. Stop fighting each other and do that. And you'll achieve 20 if you let them achieve 20. Did you do a bit of that?
We did 50.
Oh, you did 50. I hadn't got onto that bit yet. Okay. And did you do it by doing it that way? Okay. My next question is, anyone get more than 20? And you got 50. Well done. You get a free pen. And
I'll give you a pound for it.
now you could possibly even have got more than 50 if you'd broken hands and just done that. I don't know how many times could you do that in 30 seconds? 100, 150, I don't know. Because your challenge was to get their hand down as many times as possible. So if you do that, allowing them to get a massive score, you're relying on them doing the same thing to you. In other words, now as soon as you break hands, you're relying on trust, aren't you? Because you could put your head down and do that again. Right, you've got 150. How many have I got? 0, I didn't do it. That's not great. If they're taking a competitive approach and you're taking a collaborative approach, in that situation, you will often get shafted, that word, from earlier on. But if the trust is there, then you can collaborate. And this works really neatly for negotiation in exactly the same way. If you get involved in competitive negotiations going up against the other party, you will limit the value that can be created. If you can get creative, then you can only get more out of it. That involves in introducing other variables, other factors. If you can get truly collaborative, real trust, where you actually trust each other, then that's when you get into win-win. Because then you can start doing things like trading low cost for high value. Things that don't cost me very much but that are worth a lot for you, I'll let you have that, but only in return for things that don't cost you very much that are worth a lot for me.
Just wondering whether you can get a collaborative negotiation when, and you may not even think this is the case when all the cards are in their hand.
Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? If you're up against strong old Mark, then it's going to be tough, isn't it? And that's why we've got an imbalance of power here. If it's an imbalance of power, typically it's down the bottom end of the thermometer. And the reason for that is, if you look at almost any sector that you choose to think of, and you think of the market leader in that sector, and then think about the way that people describe them, they will be described typically, we'll probably all know exceptions to this, but typically they will be described as arrogant, short-term focused. And the reason for that is because they've got power. What's the point of having power if you're not going to use it? Because things are cyclical, things change. They won't have that power in the long term. I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, by the way, but it's just the way it works, isn't it? So if there's an imbalance of power, then yeah, you've got to be really careful with it. And while we often find that the party with less power is the one who wants to move up the thermometer and focus on the long term, focus on the less tangible, focus on the collaboration. The party with the power is quite happy to deal down here. Because why should they give you stuff in return if they don't need to? Maybe their view. And that's why they're described as arrogant and short-term focused. Because they can be. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about the way of the world, isn't it? Back to Brexit. What happened in autumn of, or in fact, what happened on June the 24th, 2016, was something that happened which hadn't been mentioned, not to my knowledge anyway, prior to June the 23rd. Was on June the 24th, the EU said, okay, you're off, you owe us 95 billion euros. There had been no mention of that before June the 23rd. All of a sudden, we owe them a lot of money. Not only have we not got that 350 million a week to spend on the NHS, we actually now owe them. That's slightly different. No one told us about this. David Davis, remember him? First Brexit Secretary? There have been a few now, haven't there? He was the first one. And he said, no, it doesn't work like that. And he said, we'll do a good trade deal with you, post-Brexit. If we get a good trade deal, linking issues, driving up the thermometer, then we can pay you a settlement. But I can't just pay it in isolation. Quite right. Michel Barnier used his favourite word, non. He said, no. I'm not going to do the accent. It doesn't work like that. You pay what you owe, you settle like a good, honourable country does, then we'll talk about trade deals. Going to be the toughest summer ever. Do you remember that, David Davis? We're going to... And then after a little while, he said, all right then. And we had a bit of a haggle, didn't we? And we settled at, I think, 39 billion. Trade deal. Barnier, no. Now we talk about rights of EU citizens in the UK. Well, yeah, okay, that's fair enough, really, isn't it? Okay, yeah, we'll do that. And they said, we'll do for your citizens in Europe what you do for our citizens in the UK. Oh, that's fair enough as well. Okay, well, we'll do that. Trade deal now. No. Irish border now. Kind of still there, really, aren't we? And this is what parties with power do. Whatever your view on Brexit is, just purely from a negotiation point of view, what became very evident very quickly is the EU in the negotiation had the power. And they were able to isolate the variables and treat them one at a time. As we desperately tried to link the issues and failed, what they did was isolate the variables and treat them one at a time and get all the bits they want. And that's just a reflection of power. And parties with power do that. They can do it very nicely. I think Barnier's got the most fantastic style. He's collaborative and trustworthy, you may even think. I don't know. Well, that might be controversial. I don't know.
Also a reflection of we put up David Davis.
Well, he didn't last for it. Well, and I think he retired. Anyway, yeah, it could be. We're down to then the skills of the individuals, aren't we? We're down to all sorts of things. We're down to things like empowerment. Who's empowered to negotiate or not? What is the plan? What's the strategy? And what we got, there's so many things in here with Brexit, but everyone says it's got to be win-win. It's got to be win-win. Because every negotiation should be win-win. Couldn't be any more wrong about that. Not every negotiation is win-win. And don't be fooled into thinking that everything is a collaborative, long-term, mutual gain situation. It simply isn't. And when it isn't, you're better to recognise that and just accept that sometimes you're going to be involved in a tough, firm, short-term focused, price, money-related negotiation. There's nothing wrong with it. And sometimes you'll be involved in those, and sometimes in the middle there, and you adapt your approach accordingly. There were people also saying, we cannot tell them what we want. Do you remember that? All those political commentators, typically, in that autumn of 2016, don't tell them what we want. It's like, don't tell them your name, Pike. It was one of those, wasn't it? Don't tell them what we want, because you wouldn't show your hand in a game of poker. Well, of course you wouldn't show your hand in a game of poker, but it's not a game of poker. How are you going to get what you want if you don't tell them? I think the reason we didn't tell them what I want is, they said, don't tell them your strategy. We didn't tell them our strategy because we didn't have a strategy. That was more the point, I think. Well, we may be controversial. Everyone's going to have their own view, but anyway. But you need a strategy. You need the right people doing it. You need to recognise the type of negotiation and adapt your approach accordingly. And sometimes you're in the position with less power. Okay, you can do some things to change at least the perception of power, which I'll come on to very shortly. And if you can't, well, then you've got to adapt your approach accordingly. Okay, now we've got a few things I'd still like to get through in the limited time that we have. Here's another one, another interesting one I think for you here. Number of words coming up on the screen. What I'd like you to do, just a quick show of hands, if there are any words on there which you would not like to be described as. So if there are people who know you, I'm talking about in life now generally, people who know you, colleagues, family, teammates, whatever, and might save a bit of time. Well, let's go. Conforming. Might come up. People don't like to be described as conforming, typically. Anything else? Transparent, maybe? Anything apart from those two? Any words you would not like to be described as on there? Sounds like not. Okay. Well, there's one in particular I want to talk about. Does anybody want to not be described as fair? Didn't think so. Okay. Here's an interesting one. Fairness. First, I'd like to consider, what does fair mean? I mean, an actual definition of fairness, and we've got 20 odd people in the room here. If we all wrote down our definition of fairness, what it means to us, and then shared it, we'd probably have 20 quite different definitions, because fairness is a concept. It's actually quite hard to pin down what does it mean, different things in different circumstances, because fair is quite a hard thing, quite a nebulous thing to pin down in itself. Our own attitude to what's fair changes on circumstance, changes based on kind of the end of the lens we're looking at. I'll give you a really, really quick example. Back to the kids. I've got two daughters, 11 and 9, go back about 5 years or so. They've both been to a party, same party, Saturday afternoon. I only learned when my eldest child was born, about 11 years ago, that sugar is evil. I had absolutely no idea. It was pre-sugar tax and all that. My wife was aware of all this. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, and in those days, I used to be given sugar cubes as a treat, by the way. I mean, clearly, my parents were trying to do so, I don't know, but not anymore. And when they go to parties, they get party bags, they come back, there are good party bags and bad party bags. Good party bags have little toys and stuff. Bad party bags are bags full of sugar. One such party, in they came, Daddy, got a party bag. It's full of sweets, my eldest daughter. If you met her, this is her, really. If you describe her in these terms, probably. She said, I've got a bag of sweets, can I share them with you? It's just her. So I said, of course. Because it's my job, by the way, to get the sweets off the children, even though it's not my rule. That's unfair in itself, as far as I'm concerned, but there we go. And so I have to get ever creative. In she came. Can I share my sweets? Of course. Sit down. Tip the sweets out. And it was one for you, one for me, she was doing. And I was getting half the sweets just straight off the bat, so I sensed an opportunity here. So I frowned at her. I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm sharing the sweets." I said, "Yeah, I know, but you know what I've told you about being fair?" And she said, "Yeah, but it's one for you, one for me." I said, No, stand up." She was about 6. She came to about there on me. You know where we're going with this? I said, "I'm twice the size of you. If we're going to be fair, it's 2 for me and 1 for you." And when she realised I was serious and I was actually going to carry this out, she started crying and calling me unfair. I think my job is to toughen them up for the world a little bit. So I got 2/3 of the sweets. I was happy. So I sent her off to blow her nose and sort herself out, which she duly did. And it only took her about half an hour, because later on I was walking past the living room. She's in there with her little sister, who, by the way, isn't like that. She takes after her mother. And in a rare moment of weakness, though, when she saw how upset her big sister was, she said, I'll share my sweets with you. And I heard this. I thought, what's wrong with her? And they did a similar thing. She tipped the sweets out, and they're kind of doing a roughly even pile. And the eldest one said, no, that's not fair. I'm bigger than you. And what had been completely unfair half an hour earlier when it was done to her was perfectly fair when she was the one dishing it out. And this is fairness. Fairness is a bit of a distraction. I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression here. I'm not saying you should be unfair. That's not what this is about at all. But people pay for their sense of fairness. If you have an overactive sense of fairness, great. It probably means you're a really nice person. But if the other party in your negotiations picks up on that, they might exploit it. And that's all I care about. Just be careful, because it's not necessarily about what's fair. Because what are the chances of you and them agreeing on what's fair? I think that's going to be very hard. It's about what's workable. So is it about what's fair? Because what's fair for you, is that what's fair for them? I don't know. So don't let fairness get in the way. Don't be unfair. Perception of fairness, absolutely. Go for that. And now, just a few other words here. And I'm interested in if any of these words you would like to be described as. Unpredictable, maybe. I'm going to guess, perhaps. And unreadable, often people go with that. It depends what we mean by emotional. I mean, sort of playing emotions is typically an undesirable trait for most instances. Most of these people don't want to be described as in life, but there's a slight problem here, and that is that these are the behaviours you'll see from people when they're negotiating. There are some people who would say that these actually are the behaviours of a negotiator, which doesn't mean that we're advocating this. We're certainly not advocating dishonesty. I think closed is okay, but dishonest isn't. But it's not necessarily about what you do, it's about the other party. Because you will come, I'm sure you have done already, you'll come across these behaviours, people being irrational, unpredictable. Who would you rather negotiate with? You know, Donald Trump or Theresa May? Doesn't mean I'm advocating one over the other, by the way. But one is probably easier to get a deal with. One's easier to deal with. The one who's a bit unpredictable, irrational, emotional, that's hard to negotiate with those sorts of people. Kim Jong-un, a little irrational. I'm not saying you should do these things, but what I am saying is that you should adapt your behaviour to what you feel is appropriate for the negotiation. If you just go into your negotiations operating by those other words, the social values that you've been brought up to do, there will be times where some of those will be inappropriate. Same as my daughters, you've been brought up since you were that big to answer questions, and it's rude not to answer questions, isn't it? We all know that. And that's been so firmly reinforced within us that when it comes to a negotiation, now we're all in our 20s and 30s by the looks of the room here, that they've been so firmly reinforced that if we don't answer questions, it's wrong, it's bad, it's naughty, it's unacceptable behaviour. You know, people know how to play that. It's hard not answering questions sometimes, but I'm saying there are some things you shouldn't answer when it comes to negotiation. So it just requires a little bit of thought in advance of the negotiation. What's the type of negotiation, a la thermometer? And what sort of behaviour do we need to display? And so you can adapt your behaviour to what you believe is appropriate. It's not what I think you should do, it's whatever you believe is appropriate. Don't just be led there by your social values. Don't just behave in the way that makes you comfortable, because some people can play that. Behave in what's appropriate for the circumstance. Okay, are we all right for a few more minutes, Craig? I think we're Yeah, and we'll go on to. In fact, we can move on from these couple of slides. The one thing we haven't spoken about, and I'll just show you a couple more slides, and then we'll open up to questions. We'll move on from this, and it's just a confirmation of what I was just talking about, because we haven't talked a lot about power, and I want to touch very, very briefly on power, and really the conclusion of what I want to talk about with power is that people tend to underestimate how much power they've got. You've probably got more power than you think you have in your negotiations, and yet a lot of the time you'll be negotiating with organisations that are bigger than you. You'll be negotiating with people who have got the money. Susanna was asking me about kids earlier on, and how you get them to do the things that you want them to do. Who's got the power in that relationship? Well, the parent's got the power. We all know that. It's the parent's rules. What the parent says. The parent has the power. But who's got control? That could be different, can't it? So what actually happens in an interaction doesn't have to be reflective of power, because power is another very subjective thing. And you go into a negotiation thinking about your world, you'll be thinking about all these sorts of things, the market forces, if it's profit or revenue for your organisation. You might be thinking about on a more personal basis, how you're measured. You've got a deadline that changes things and affects things. And then there's things like your ego, your empowerment, your ability to negotiate. That can work against you in itself. The levels of stress that you feel, and then behaviourally, your behaviour will change. Negotiation being this very behavioural thing. And my point here is that if you go into a negotiation, a bit like the point with the house example, I said I'd come back to it. If you go into a negotiation thinking about your circumstance, I wanted the house. It was the house I wanted. I was happy with the price. Well, to some degree, you can pay for that. If you think about your world, your pressures, your circumstance, if you can go into negotiation putting all those things to one side and focus on the other party's perspective, because all of this is going on for them as well. And the next slide just shows that their world's the same. They're also thinking about these types of things, but it looks different from their perspective. But they're thinking about the pressure that is on them. Okay, it's probably at a good moment that it's stuck. There are things you can do to check to affect the balance of power, because all I want to say in just summary of power before we go to any questions is that there's two sorts of power. There's real power and perceived power. Real power is determined by things out of your control. It's determined by things like precedent, perhaps relative size of operation or organisation, brand maybe. It's determined by things that you can't probably affect in advance of this negotiation. But perceived power, A, is more influential than real power, and you can change the perception of power. And you can change it by doing things like recognising the law of scarcity, the law of reciprocity. If you want someone to do something, if you want your kids to do something, but you've got to be prepared to do it yourself. You can't watch telly in the lead up to your evening meal, which is what they want to do. And the reason you can't do it is because I want to watch Pointless. It's not that's not going to work. Kids have the most amazing hypocrisy meter, don't they? So if you want someone to do something, you've got to be prepared to do it yourself, whether it's make a move in a negotiation, whether it's displaying trust, whether it's sharing information. Law of scarcity, make them work for it, the thing I've already spoken about. Law of authority, thinking about who's delivering the message. Satisfaction, the law of satisfaction, trade satisfaction, as you make it hard for them. So there's all sorts of things which can help to change the perception of power. Get in early, make your proposal first. I'll finish on this point, because a lot of people make the mistake of inviting the other party's proposal. You're only not going to like it in all likelihood. Go first, counterintuitive. Get your offer in, take control. There's a concept called anchoring. And you can be the little party with no power, but you can still go in and anchor your position. Then they've got to pull you from that position, rather than you going in and asking them how it's going to be and then trying to pull them from theirs or just accepting it. Get in first and anchor. So don't just accept the status quo where it comes to the balance of power. You probably underestimated your power anyway, and you can change the perception of power. Okay, I'm just over the hour. As Craig has very politely suggested, now or 5 minutes ago was a good time to open up to questions. So that's a good time to do it now. Anything at all. I know you always get this awkward moment now with, what should I ask? So there's nothing off limits, as far as I'm concerned. Go for it in terms of questions. Anything in terms of preferably related to negotiation.
Brendan's ready to kick us off. Yeah,
it's about a power question really, and thinking about our own circumstances in the world of social enterprise.
delivery of social projects, and very often when I'm negotiating the negotiation, what's behind it is that it could be business critical, that jobs depend on it, that we don't win the contract, there are real direct, sometimes major consequences.
Yeah.
People I'm negotiating with are very often local authority or NHS commissioners who haven't got the same degree of skin in the game. In fact, often they have no skin in the game at all. But I've often thought of Milton Friedman's description of this kind of transaction when he talks about their people spending other people's money on other people. So they're twice removed from the consequences as well.
Yeah.
And so they come in from a totally different power base, but also value base. And how you redress that balance, I've always found that extremely difficult. So any tips on that?
Well, the first thing is, when it comes to assessing the real power in that situation, the first thing we advocate that everyone always does is you've got to set your break point in a negotiation. And a lot of people don't even do that. A bit like you see people, someone going to an auction and they come out and they think, oh, I'll just blow my budget because they didn't set a break point in advance. Some people do set a break point in advance of an auction and break it anyway because they get involved in the competitive spirit, the fear of losing or the desire to win, all that sort of thing. So the first thing is based on the actual circumstance, so based on people losing their jobs and the real factors in it, so you know exactly where you can go to if you have to. That has to be absolutely clear to you. What I recommend you then do is have a think about what their break point is and focus on that instead. If you're in that sort of situation, you then need loads of tactics. And we got, it come one of our longer courses, we go do a whole session on tactics, and we've got 39 tactics which you can put into two camps. One is a bit like the art and the science, one are very kind of process driven, how you come up with your numbers, how you make your proposals and move from your position, move in ever decreasing sizes, all those sort of things. But the other more impactful ones are the emotional or emotive tactics, and you've got things like guilt and the guilt trip, and it's laying out to them very clearly in advance that there are jobs at stake here, and if you're dealing with someone, put that onus on them, and if we fail, if we don't reach an agreement here, or if it's not at a certain level, then the X number of people who may lose their jobs, you know, it's down to them. Now, you may need to be careful about how you phrase that, but this is in the positioning early on in the negotiation to make sure that they recognise you know, it's not just a blind decision behind a desk that they're making here, that they understand the implications and ratifications. Oh, and the flip side, what's the positive? If we reach a good agreement here, not only are going to people keep their jobs, but it's good for the community, and it's blah, blah, blah. Not justifying, because it matters when it comes in the process. If you do it early, before we negotiate, then we call it positioning. If you fall back on it too late, then it looks like weak justifying. If you go through with this, people are going to lose their jobs. They've already made their decision. And that's when they'll put it back on you. Do it early. Get them, as best you can, emotionally vested in that decision, and that their decision has got livelihoods at stake.
Just interested if you've got any headline tips on salary negotiation.
Yeah.
When people are the ones asking you as the employer for the pay rise, and when you then are having to work with them and carry on that relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Craig talked about when I've been on telly. I made a programme with Channel for Dispatches, if anybody watches Dispatches. I made a Dispatches programme a couple of years ago about how to negotiate a pay rise, very much on the other side of the foot. About how people go in, because I'll tell you one thing straight away is that people asking for the employee always feels in the unempowered position here. You really do. You're the parent, back to your question from earlier as well. You're the parent in this situation. When somebody wants something from you, whether it's your 2.5-year-old or whether it's one of your employees, that's when you have the power. In the same way that my kids, you know, autumns, when I have any power I ever have in my house, in the autumn, when it's the dancing program in our house, when they come and they want to watch Strictly, and then I can get them to the side of the bedroom and clean my car, do all the stuff, because it's conditional on them watching the program. So when somebody comes to you with a pricing, with a pay rise request, that is a great opportunity to open up everything, and you can look at performance, and you don't just give them the money that they're after, but based on certain criteria, performance and other responsibilities. You know, if you could reset that relationship now so that they're doing what you want them to do, you don't have to give them the whole lot that they're asking for. If you can't pay them any more money, I mean, if that's the situation, then I think honesty and just openness is it, and we don't have any more budget, and we're in the sector that we're in and whatever else, and that's what it is. And when things change, I'll open the conversation again for you. But if you can, that's your opportunity. So don't in fact, for any of your negotiations, don't just give anything away. Don't just agree to anything. It's back to make them work for it. And they can get their 2% or 4% or whatever it is, and it's stepped, and they get there a bit along the way, and it's reviewed quarterly. and it's based on certain parameters, and if they take over this responsibility and do that for 3 months, then yeah, they can get their 3% or whatever on that basis.
Any thoughts on a negotiation where you're kind of progressing? Think about the thermometer. You might be starting cold,
yeah,
and then you're kind of working up to warm.
Yes.
And how you kind of stage that and
Yeah.
kind of indicate, right, we're in a different phase of negotiation now.
And I would always rather do it that way around. Start colder and move up and
Yeah.
make it warmer. And just ratios overall is better. That would make them work for everything. Yes, and the best way to do it is by introducing more variables. The one thing you can really affect is what's included in the negotiation. So you've got a choice of either isolating the variables or linking the issues. So introduce more into it, and that requires an exploratory phase, understanding what's important to them, bit of blue sky, that hypothetical thinking. So without any agreement trying to be reached at this stage, but what do they want to get out of this? It feels like a risky question, doesn't it, to ask them what they want, ask them what's important to them. But wouldn't it be great to know that? And then they're going to ask you what's important to you, by the way. And most people's natural reaction is, don't tell them. Don't tell them. Tell them. How are you going to get it otherwise? And that's what can, a bit of openness, anchoring your position still, anchoring what's important to you, and then you can start to link things. And that's the best way to progress things, is by just opening the overall scope of it and recognising that for them there are positive consequences of doing it this way rather than the negative consequences of closing it down the other way.
Just quick to on Anand and then Raoul, and then then I just want to do a quick
Frame my questions. I've got 100, and I'm just trying to think of all.
Yeah, and I want to do some group stuff in a second as well,
Yeah.
just to kind of round us off as
Great.
well, which should be.
Coming back to the thermometer.
Yes.
I have concluded as a seller that I do not believe in a commoditized product or service. So I always start with our team.
Yep.
Considering how we can add some value, so we do not accept the commoditized service.
Brilliant.
Do you think that's?
I think that's right, because it's in your interest to. And almost any seller will do that, and they should do. The minute you accept and get involved at this negotiation on the basis of my product being commoditized, then it's all going to be price focused. And this is why you see that difference of interaction. Procurement, whether that's their title or not, people buying stuff, I'm really generalising, typically are quite happy to drive things down the thermometer, make it commoditised, make it price focused, strip out the relationship. The worst that can happen is you're selling whatever you're selling, you deal with your customer, your internal stakeholder in the other organisation, and they want your thing and they see the value and they want it and they'll pay for it, and it's all going swimmingly, and then procurement get wheeled in, and guess what? I don't care about any of that. Sharpen your pencil or some such cliche. Sales want to drive things up the thermometer. And sales want to take the focus away from price. There's only one reason why sales want to take the focus away from price, is so they get a better price. So yeah, absolutely. And it's always that kind of dichotomy. Sales pull it up, procurement want to pull it down. So if you're buying something, be quite prepared to make it commoditized. You might pay for it, you get what you pay for. Decide on the product. Some things are mission critical and you shouldn't. But yeah, that's in your selling stage early on. Make sure they recognise the value. And I will do that at the start of an interaction with people. Ask them on what basis they're making the decision. Is it a price focused decision? Lots of people don't actually want to look cheap. Lots of people don't want to say, yeah, it's all on price. But if they do, I say, great, it's not for us then. I can save you some time now, because there are cheaper people than us out there. Because there are, and I bet there are cheaper people than you out there as well. And the credibility you get from doing that, almost call their bluff on it. Yeah, great. Here, I can give you the name of one. I can give you the name of a cheaper supplier if you want. It's a bold one.
It was a concluding. Reflects on what you heard today, and what Richard Dunn's message is most powerful for you. You're taking into your business for today. A couple of minutes with your neighbour, then we'll tap in on one or two. I'd love to hear back from some of the pairs. Can't hear back from all of you because of time. But Anand, I kind of stopped your question, so I'm going to let you go first in terms of your feedback.
I think 2 points came out here about this thermometer, and using that as a way to think about what key attributes you need to achieve what you need to, and then think about anchoring as well, getting there first, positioning rather than justification. So that kind of stood out for us as a group more.
Yes. Yeah, that was most useful to you, was it? What was most useful to others out of all of that? Because there's a load of stuff there. Jude?
I haven't quite figured out what this is, but as a charity, what does it mean in terms of fundraising? Because I think we sit there going, can we have some arms, please? Can we have some more porridge, please? And actually, maybe we just need to change that dynamic a little bit. I don't know if it's possible with philanthropists.
Absolutely
it
right.
probably needs to be done.
Yes.
In some way.
Understanding your own power of it in those situations.
Doing more anchoring, actually saying, actually, if we don't get the third or the fourth or the fifth year, there's real consequences. And putting that back on them.
Sharing the guilt.
As opposed,
you can be just as commercial about it as any other commercial operation, without question.
Feel that way, but
Yes. I was catching Mervyn's eye just before about that very point.
Just the most important item with the guild. I mean, one of the things we talked about with the councils, at the moment, particularly councils, it's actually not a win-win, it's a lose-lose. They're strapped for cash and they're just trying to desperately save themselves. Financial services review are trying to save themselves. Not racing to the bottom.
Yeah.
Which bits of behaviour is anyone going to change that they currently use? Because on my part, what I've picked up from today is, I'm far too agreeable in most situations and want to please people so bloody much that I end up giving the farm away. Dan's message is be a bit more awkward, be a little bit less like that in your negotiation. You can still be nice, but just be a little bit more firm.
Your style can still be personable,
Yes.
but the content of what you're doing can be as firm and as tough as you like it to be. I think Barnier is a great example. I'd love to have a glass of wine with Michel Barnier. He seems like a really nice guy, and when he talks, it's very smooth. But the content of what he says is about as tough as it comes. It's a good model. I know we're into politics, and you all have different views, perhaps, but just on a personal point of view.
So, what on a personal level is coming through for you? Is it not just what was said in your group, but what's mattering for you here?
I think it's a very useful challenge to the notion that the relationship building is the route to a good deal. The only route that I've always felt that, and I think that's the challenge today. I perceive as my revelation.
So it's not always about win-win, actually.
No.
Yeah.
Not when you've got such a power imbalance, and also, as I referred to earlier, a value imbalance as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think particularly in that context of the funder having that mental list of who's agreeable and therefore weak.
Yes.
Where they go to first. Because I think those behaviours put us at the bottom of that list.
Yes, you're easy, so we'll come to you for our saving before we deal with.
Ironically, given how many is funded by local government does nationally, every time it gets a savings target, it delivers it, so it gets another one.
Yeah.
If it was a bit more NHS, it would get bailed out.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Yeah. That Donald Trump point was an interesting one, wasn't it? Because no one wants to deal with him, but because he's tricksy, isn't he? Difficult. Yeah. Judith.
I mean, there was very rich. Thank you very much for the content, really rich. It's hard to keep everything, but I mean, apart from the whole power stuff and thinking about the power we have, and really understanding how we can leverage, if you like, that we can bring to negotiate. There's something to me about how one shares information judiciously in the right moment. So, okay to sort of set this all out and show a degree of what you want from the negotiation, but then sort of overdoing the justification.
That's right.
The response is not good. So it's like
there's a balance.
Nuance that.
And deciding that in advance. What am I going to share? What am I not going to share? And even if I get asked it, I'm not going to share it. And there are ways of not answering questions. You can say, I'm not prepared to answer that question, or you can deflect. And why do you ask that? Why is that important? Play a bit dumb. Playing dumb is brilliant. I find it quite easy to play dumb, and it's really effective. I don't know. I'll come back to you. So you don't have to be adversarial in the way that you don't answer questions. But if you've decided in advance, because otherwise you find yourself just going into things, and we've all done it. You afterwards think, I wish I hadn't said that. What did I say that for? Well, the reason is because you didn't think about it in advance. You didn't think this is what I'm going to go into and not go into. You can anticipate the questions you're likely to get. So it's a really good point.
And for a couple more, then we need to give Dan. I want to give Dan a little bit of time to finish, to sum up and
and also share an interesting offer. Okay, Dan. But one other ask of you as well is that we always ask our speakers to say what is there's one thing you want to remember out today. What is it? So just if you could append your ending bit, that question, that'd be fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'll start with that then, because I've got something fresh in my mind, and that is play to your strengths. You know, in the sector that you're in, it's emotional, it's emotive. And I think you can use it rather than being a victim of it, more so. You know, some of the most successful charities are actually run by so-and-sos. Actually, just on your point of where they've got you pegged, which doesn't mean you have to be like that, by the way. But you mean you don't have to be ultra amenable and the things that Craig was just saying. So you make a very conscious decision around that. And on that, and just building on something else we just said, kind of very much linked to that, I think you can set out in advance. There's two ways we can go here, whoever you're talking to, because I don't like making threats in a negotiation, because then you are in a race to the bottom. Threats lead to counter threats. But you can point out, look, we can take this route with less funding and less whatever, and these are the consequences, and this is where we'll probably end up. Or we can take this route and the positive route. And if you're going to point out a threat, I'd always point out a positive as well, and show that there's, and almost put the onus on them. Look, it's up to you which way we go here. I advocate that with our commercial organisations. You know, suppliers speaking to retailers. Two ways we can do it. Retailers talking to suppliers. You know, we've got some suppliers are going to work with us, some aren't. It's up to you which camp you're in. If you choose not to, this is the way it will go. If you choose to, this is the way it will go. And clearly you're influencing, and you'll stack one in one way, very much a leading conversation, but nevertheless it can be very effective to do positioning in that way. In terms of the other things to take away, I said at the start there'll be three things to take away, and then this is kind of a very, very broad summary really of just what we've spoken about. So it's about being in control, but it's not about aggressive, it's not about rude, but you can be in control. Control is not reflective of power. Even if you're not in control, you can, even if you're not in a position of power, you can be in control of the proceedings of a negotiator. It's not about your feelings, and you can adapt your behaviours. You know, some of the toughest people that you know, if you saw them at home at the weekend at the barbecue on Saturday evening, you wouldn't believe it's the same person, because some people change their behaviours for the circumstance. It's about trading satisfaction, thinking about how you want the other party to feel. It's about trust, creating value, and making things hard to obtain, the thing we've just spoken about as well, so that ultimately they should feel satisfied at the end of it. And power. Really effective negotiators use power, even if they haven't got it, because you can change the perception of power by doing some very, very specific things, such as you were saying over here, getting in early, this anchoring things. We touched on it, and it's a massive area. We all get anchored, we get preconditioned all the time. Just as consumers, we get preconditioned, so you can use it. It can be subtle, it can be not subtle, but you can use it. Excuse me. Final thing, as Craig said, we've got an offer. We run at Bridgeability, we run all sorts of different programs, but for open programs, we run regular advanced behavioural programs, which are 2.5 days in length. So we go into all these things and more into great detail. We give people a chance to practice negotiating. They typically happen in Oxfordshire every other month. The next one's the end of March, and then every other month thereon. A place on that cost for each individual costs £1,980, and it's residential, and the accommodation is £415. That includes all the meals. What we're prepared to do as a promotion in conjunction with the social club is do an offer. If you're a member and you come, in conjunction with the social club, then we're prepared to offer a place for £500 plus VAT, but £500 all in. So that's your accommodation, your place and everything, because of the operations that you have. And the only thing that would help us there is it would have to be quite a last minute place. So within the last sort of 2 weeks leading up to it. So that would help us as well. So if we've had a cancellation or somebody who can't make it, or we can't find someone at the last minute, because it's normally around 8 people. So it's a small group, it's really intensive. It's full on, starts at 5:30 on day one through to 5:30 on the final day, and you won't have time to really think or breathe in between those two 5:30s. It's immersive in negotiation. So if you're interested in that, come through Craig if that's all right in the first instance, or he'll just give you my details, or perhaps we'll just send that out. I don't mind if you come directly to me. We do run one-day programs as well, but we run those less often, kind of for demand. So and that's £585 per place. It's not residential or anything, and we could work something out for that as well that would cover costs for us. So but we don't have a one of those coming up just in the short term. But if there are a couple of you that are interested in that, then we could put a one-day program together for the right fee.
And we'll send out on this. So
yeah, we'll confirm everything.
Just really say thank you, Dan. That's been a really good masterclass. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to be hanging around at least 10:30. If anyone wants to chat, Dan's here. We're here, obviously, as always, and you're all here. So use the time if you wish to network, or if you need to rush, then that's fine as well. In March, we've got our second positive thinking event this year, which was with Ben Lane of Acumen Trust. It's called Building Your Authentic Voice. It's all about your skills and abilities as a storyteller, because in our roles we're often having to tell the story of what we're doing with whatever audience, and Ben's day is all about developing that story in our work in order to be able to present what we're doing in the most effective way. And that's in March. It's all on the website, but that's our next thing we've got coming up. I won't go on about all the rest of the stuff coming up because you're not going to remember it, but that's the next thing. So that's on on March the I can't quite remember what day it is. It's escaped my mind, but that's coming up. That's coming up very, very soon. Yeah, I'll just find the it was on my thing just now. So anyone got it handy? Just bear with me one little second. March the 11th, and it's here. And it's with Ben Lane, who's brilliant, by the way. So that's and just book on in the usual way. Thanks everybody. Have a great few weeks ahead. Look forward to seeing you individually and groups between that. Yeah, me and Mark are around as usual to talk if you wish to. We're done. Thank you, and thank you, Hampsons.